Hello and welcome to Kirkwall Airport on Orkney in X-Plane 11, and in front of us on the tarmac we've got the leading edge simulations Saab 340A in Loganair livery, and today we're going to try and recreate a real world flight that Loganair do from Kirkwall to Inverness. So let's just have a look at one of the example flights. So this is from Flight Radar. It's a Kirkwall to Inverness flight, fairly recent one, and this one happens to pretty much follow airways all the way. Sometimes the flight seems to take a more direct route, get vectors, possibly just because that speed things up, or maybe it's to do with the weather or wind direction, but for this example we're going to keep it simple and just follow the airways, like this flight. So if we have a look, it's a fairly short flight, it's about half an hour, and maximum altitude 12,000 feet. So let's just see how we're going to track the flight. So switch to sky vector now. So we're at Kirkwall. I'll zoom in a bit. First leg of the flight, we're going to take off. The wind is from the west today, so we're going to take off from runway 27. You're going to turn to then follow airway N560 south towards Wick, and then at Wick we're going to turn and follow 560 down here to this waypoint called Bombay, and at Bombay we're then going to look at the approach chart, the arrival chart for Inverness, to complete the arrival. Okay, so first things first, let's jump into the cockpit. Now, only thing I've done apart from cold and dark is I've used the auto start feature available in the menu for the Saab 340A to start the engines running. So next thing I'm going to do is bring up the checklists. Now, before we even get to the checklists, let's get basics for navigation sorted out. So let's just check the weather. And QNH 1027. So we want 1027 hectopascals. This plane, hectopascals are over here on the co-pilot altimeter. So let's go to 1027, which is 3033 inches, which we can also set over here. Is it 3033? I think it was. I've forgotten already. Let's just double check. Yeah. Okay, so altimeter is set. The altitude we want to go to is 12,000 feet, and let's just assume we're just going to get clearance to go straight to 12,000. I don't know if there's a quicker way to set the desired altitude here other than just twiddling the mouse scroll wheel, but we're nearly there now anyway. We're going to navigate using VOR stations, so we need to tune those in on Nav1 and Nav2. So going back to Sky Vector, if we just have a look, if we switch it to VFR, we can see the VOR stations. So this sort of circle here with direction points at 0 degrees, 30, 60, 90, etc. This shows a VOR station, and these are the radials from it. And so first one we want is Kirkwall 108.6, and then we're going to want Wick on 113.6. So 108.6, let's just get that set. That's Kirkwall. That's the first one we want, and then we'll get Wick pre-selected because that's the next one we're going to need. That's going to be 113.6. And what I'll also do is have Wick selected on Nav2. So Nav1's Kirkwall, Nav2 is Wick. Okay, and I think now we can follow the after engine start checklist. Actually, before we do that, we've selected the navigation radio frequencies, but we haven't entered any radials. So let's just have a look at the direction we've got to fly. So obviously going to take off on runway heading and then make a turn. And if you look on here, helpfully, the bearing of airway M560 is 14 degrees. So that's 14 degrees from Wick, and at the other end we've got Kirkwall, so if we add 180 to that, that's 194 degrees. So basically the radial from the Kirkwall VOR is going to be 194. So that's the first thing we're going to set, is a 194 radial on nav 1. Now if you watch my video on the King Air C90 and assigning keyboard keys to autopilot functions, you'll know that I've got the VOR radial adjust for nav 1 and 92 assigned to keys. So in this case I'm going to use the keys to turn the VOR 1 radial to 194 degrees, which is there. So that's going to be the radial we want to get onto after we've taken off. Now another thing we can do is set our initial autopilot settings. So when we gauge the autopilot, we're going to be in heading mode, and we also want to start climbing towards 12,000 feet. Now if you press the climb button and you have a look over here at the speed display, each time you press the climb button you'll see there's a white pointer at the bottom that moves around. That's because there were 3 pre-selected climb speeds, sort of just over 140, just over 180 and just over 160. We're going to go for the middle one. This gives us kind of a good compromise between speed and climb rate. So I'm going to pre-select that. So that's given us, so we've got pressure set, we've got nav radius set, we've got our initial nav radial set. So that's us good on our initial navigation. The navigation for the rest of the route we'll cover once we get going. So now we'll go for the after engine start checklist. So we start with the panel up here, and the first thing is auto coursing. Auto coursing is basically auto feathering, so it means that if you have an engine failure just after takeoff, for example, the propeller blades will automatically be feathered, so they offer the least resistance to the air, which means that you've got maximum thrust available from the single engine that's left, and the minimal drag from the engine that's failed, because the propellers are basically in the feathered or coarse pitch position. So we turn that on. Bus tie is this stuff over here, and there's no lights, so I'm guessing I always think that means we don't need to do anything. External power is off. Generators, again, we got no lights on. And we got this main inverter to turn on. Air conditioning, force of habit here. Let's just get things a little bit warmer. Emergency lights, we want to arm, and the emergency light arm switch is here. And it's doing the thing where it needs the cover opened, so let's just do that. Here we go. Fuel, actually let's just double check the fuel. We only need, I mean this flight's about half an hour, so I mean it's probably too much fuel, but we've got plenty. Okay, condition levers. Actually, before we do condition levers, while we're here, let's reset these, and let's do ice protection while we're here as well. This stuff should probably go off on its own. We'll check it again in a minute. So condition levers to max. So what we'll do, before we do that, let's bring up the handy view that shows you the levers. Okay, so currently on start, I'm going to move them to unfeathered, let the engines settle, and then move to maximum or fine pitch. Ice protection, let's just have another look at the overhead panel. Yeah, this is looking okay now, so we can, I don't think we need any extra ice protection on today. Overhead panels checked, assume we've got signals, next one we have is the taxi checklist. Now before we can taxi, there's one thing we have to do, which is engage nose wheel steering. So you do that by pushing this knob here sort of forward and down. Let's get these down here out of the way. Brakes we'll be checking. Altimeters we have, let's just make sure that QNH still 1027, yeah. And the altitude's about right for the airport. Flaps, we're going to go 1 notch. Instruments and radios we've done. Test not modeled, CTOT. Going to go for 90%. CTOT gives you constant torque on takeoff. It means that it's kind of like an auto throttle for takeoff, so it means you're guaranteed a constant 90% thrust. If you move the power levers by about 60-70%, the CTOT will kick in and give you a nice stable takeoff thrust. And you need to turn it off after the initial sort of climb out. Okay, brief myself, so that's fine. Lights is a good one before we start moving, so we'll turn on our nav and beacon and taxi lights for now, and then when we get to the runway, taxi off, strobe and landing lights on. Okay, so the only warning light over here is parking brake on, and that's fine. We're about to take that off, and we will then taxi round to runway 27. Now let's see if I can get the Kirkwall airport chart up, because one interesting thing I spotted on it. So if we go for the airport info chart, yeah, this one. So we are parked near the passenger terminal, basically here. I think we're facing this way, so we're going to make a left turn and go on taxiway E. And if you look at taxiway E, there's a note here that says available for aircraft of less than 11 tons max or weight. And there's also a span and wingspan. I'm not sure about the wingspan, but we are actually less than 11 tons. I did work it out. I think we're about 8 or 9 tons going by our weight, including fuel. So I'm going to take it that we can use that taxiway. So we're going to turn left, make a left turn. So I'm just going to switch to head tracking for taxi. Okay, so I'm going to turn left now and follow the taxiway. Just a small amount of thrust. This is quite a narrow taxiway, and you need to kind of keep in the middle of it, because if you get a wheel onto the grass then you really get stuck, and it takes a lot of thrust to get moving again. So I haven't actually checked the weather. I checked the real world weather, which we're using, but it's not always the same in X-Plane. It's okay, the windsock does vaguely look like it's pointing in the right direction, so we should be okay. So we'll just come to a stop here at the threshold and just make sure that the runway looks clear, which it does as far as we can see. And turn right now for a short backtrack, and we'll be ready to take off. Just going to brake gently now, just before we turn the aircraft round. Okay, and that's us lined up on 27, so parking brake back on for now. Head tracking off for now. Okay, heading bug. Again, using keyboard shortcut keys, I'm going to set the heading bug aligned with the runway, and we're going to follow runway heading until we get to about 500 feet. Lights, so now we want strobe on, taxi off and landing lights on. We've done auto coursing. So, external lights, takeoff signal, aircon we did, transponder, which we will set to alt. Obviously if we had real ATC we'd be assigned a squawk code which we'd need to set. Flight controls are good. Warning panel is fine, and takeoff inhibit is set, and that just stops some warnings from appearing during takeoff that you don't really need to see during takeoff. Okay. And the next checklist is climb checklist, so we are good to take off. Let's just check, see what it does. He says the wind is 200. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is advance the throttle to about 70% until CTOC kicks in, and rotate about between 110 120. So parking brake off, throttle's advanced. And we're at 90% torque, which is good. Coming up to 100 on the airspeed. 110, we're going to start to rotate. Positive rotation, I'm going to put the gear up. About 140 now, so I'm going to put flaps up as well. Get to about 500 feet, and then I'm going to make a turn to the left. So I'm going to start now. So I'm going to turn around until we are to the left of our bearing pointer towards the deflection bar to the left, so that we start to intercept the bearing to wick, so approximately here. And now I'm going to engage the yaw damper and autopilot using the keyboard shortcuts that I've got. And when we engage the autopilot, we're in heading mode, so we want a heading bug in the direction we're currently pointing, and I'm going to engage yaw damper autopilot now. So we should now be in climb and heading mode, and climb is going to keep our airspeed just above 160 and give us the best rate of climb at that airspeed up towards 12,000 feet. And now we've got this sort of stable, and in fact you can see nav deviation bar is coming in as we're now intercepting the 194 radial. So I'm going to start to turn towards 194, and then in fact I'm going to engage nav mode on the autopilot, which will track the radial for us. And now we've got that going, we can turn CTOT off. CTOT off, we want to make sure that we've got our thrust levers set to essentially be giving us climb thrust. So 880 I've seen recommended as the temperature to not exceed. And the other thing we can do now is we can coarsen our prop pitch and bring back the prop RPM to about 1230, which we'll use for the remainder of the climb and cruise, which means the props take a bigger bite of the air. It's effectively like going into a higher gear on your car or your bike. Okay, we are climbing at the airspeed set by climb setting. We've got a good rate of climb. We'll be going to be at 12,000 pretty soon. We're tracking the nav mode on the autopilot. We can go through the rest of the checklist now. So we have gear and flaps up, ice protection, not particularly going to set anything, we haven't got any lights, so I'm going to say that's good. Auto caution we can now turn off, because now if one of the engines does fail now, we'll be responsible for moving the condition lever to feathered. External lights, we can now turn the landing lights off. Cabin sign's not going to bother with. Aircon we've already done. Take-up inhibit has gone out. Cabin pressure we're not going to worry about. Prop sync we can turn on. Seat-up we already turned off. And altimeters, let's just see what's going on. In fact, now that we're above, I'm not sure what the transition altitude here is, but it's probably 3,000, 4,000 feet, so we're above that, so we're going to go to 29092 standard pressure. And we just do that on the co-pilot's altimeter as well. So now that we're at flight level, or we're heading towards flight level 120, we'll use standard pressure. And we're above 10,000 feet now. And that is it for the checklist for now. So, how are we doing? Let's have a look outside. We are coming up to the north coast of Scotland, to Caithness mainland. I think that's Stroma there, and John O'Groats sort of here. So sort of hazy, but fairly decent weather. Now let's have a quick look on the map at where we are. So taken off from Kirkwall and turn to join N560 towards Wick. Now you notice that when we get to Wick we need to turn right to a new bearing. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've got VOR2 set to the Wick VOR frequency 113.6, and we get over here we've got a readout of the distance, so it's 17 miles at the moment and dropping. When we get about 2 miles from Wick we're gonna want to turn. Well, you need to turn onto a new bearing, so let's have a look at Sky Vector. And the bearing we want is 232 degrees down here. So what we can do is we can set the bearing, again using keyboard bindings, to 232, and we can press the second course button here, which will show us the nav2 bearing information and offset. So as we get near Wick we should see the deviation come in as we intercept the 232 radar, and then we'll need to turn right to intercept it. So for now let's just have a bit of a look outside, and there we are now over John O'Groats and Duncan's Bay Head. I think that's John O'Groats here, and there's a little harbour, and this is Duncan's Bay Head up here. And the sea stacks of Duncansby down here. It's quite worth a visit, and you can walk up to them from walk over to them from the road up to Duncansby Head. Should be Wick Airport actually coming up ahead. So once we get past Wick, I'll then discuss how we're going to navigate the rest of the flight. But we're now at our assigned altitude. We can maybe go a little bit more on the throttles, but not a lot. I think, as I say, about 880 I've seen recommended as the temperature over here to keep the engines underneath. Other gauges are all in the green, which is good. Prop RPM set. We're at 12,000 feet. Decent speed. No danger of speeding in this plane, at least not unless you're descending. Let's have another look outside. Yes, in fact we can see Wick Airport coming up now, so we are soon going to need to turn to just follow N560 south towards Inverness. So let's get ready for that. So it's kind of, I always find it kind of deceptive when you look outside at that sort of height, that sort of angle, because the DME here tells me we're 7 miles away, but it looks kind of like, well, I better guess it's all relative, isn't it? Probably is about 7 miles away. But from this angle it looks like we're almost on top of the airport. So another good thing to do is when you're at any time really is try and keep your heading bug aligned with your current direction of travel. So although we're in nav mode at the moment, if we have to switch to heading mode at any time, maybe to fly around something or to follow an ATC vector, then you don't want to switch to heading mode and suddenly have the plane go off in a different direction just because you happen to have the heading bug somewhere random. And in our case, we're going to want to go to heading mode so that we can start to turn to track VOR2 to follow the new 232 bearing. So what I'm going to do now, in fact, I'm going to switch to heading mode now, because we're 3 miles away from Wick VOR. When we're about 2 miles away, I'm going to start our turn to intercept to the right to intercept the new radial. And you probably see the deviation deviation bar here start to come in as we get nearer. I'm just going to start a turn now. And there it goes. Let's in fact have a look on the ground where we are. Okay, yeah, we over the airport. VOR is somewhere here. And we've just crossed over it. So now in fact to intercept the radio we need to steer slightly right of the bearing to get on course, because the deviation bar is off to the right, so we need to steer towards it to get to the radial that we want. Now as we're near the VOR, the radial should come in quite quickly. That's it. So what I'm going to do now as well is I'll change nav 1 to Wick VOR, and I'm also going to set it to 232 degrees. If I could read it. There we go. And then I can declutter the display by removing the second course, and I'm going to switch to nav mode. So we're now following N560, airway N560 from Wick to Bonby waypoint. Oh, one thing I was going to mention, I think I said earlier that I turned the autopilot on and yaw damper on using keyboard bindings. Now that's worked fine because the autopilot is fully functioning, but if you have a look, wrong key, if you have a look at the autopilot controls, you'll see that actually the switches haven't moved. This is just, I think, because there's there's different commands perhaps needed for the graphical activation of the switches and the actual logical operation of the autopilot. So if that bothers you at all, then you can just, now that we're in a nice stable part of the flight, we can actually engage the physical switches. And it also means that this indicator, autopilot indicator, lights up green. The autopilot was fully working, and in fact the other interesting thing is that now that these switches are in the correct position, if I use the keyboard shortcut to disengage the flight director in autopilot, they will actually jump back. So it's kind of not really symmetrical, but essentially the keyboard bindings work fine. But if you want everything to be completely accurate and have the switches in the right position, then you also need to move them as well. Okay, so where are we now? Well, we're somewhere on this leg of the flight. And what happens is when we get to here, when we get to Bonby, we need to turn. So, two questions: how do we know when we got to Bonby, and what's our new heading when we get to Bonby? Well, how do we know when we got there? There's two different ways we can tell. We currently got nav 1 tuned into the VOR here. Chart tells us it's 46 nautical miles to this waypoint called Chin, and another 7 to Bombay, so that's 53. So if we use the distance readout down here, it's currently at 16 miles. When that gets to 53 on this 232 radial, we know we're at Bombay. The other thing we can do is we can tune our second nav radio to the Inverness VOR, and if we set the radial on that to be this direction, then we could look at when that comes in, when we're on that radial, and we know that that's where we want to turn to. There's nothing marked on here, so the bearing here is nicely marked, the bearing here is nicely marked. There's nothing marked here because there's no VOR station. So instead what we can do is we can look at the arrival chart for Inverness. Now the wind at Inverness, 110 at 4 knots. Okay, that's interesting. 110, if that's correct, that means we need to approach and use runway 5 rather than runway 23, which is what I was expecting. Okay, let's ignore that for 1 second. If we were gonna be landing on runway 23, this is the initial approach to runway 23, and you see here that the initial approach point is Bombay, which is 23 miles from the Inverness VOR, and the bearing is shown on here as 160 degrees. So 160 degrees is the radial we have to fly once we get to Bombay waypoint. But now I'm wondering about the wind at Inverness, so let's just have a look. Now we're using real world weather. 130, 120. Okay, so the wind is essentially from the northeast, which means we're going to have to approach, we're going to have to use runway 5 at Inverness rather than runway 23. So let's see if we can find the charts for runway 5 initial approach. Okay, it's going to be a bit more interesting. Okay, so runway 5, Bombay is where we're going to be starting. Now we have altitude restriction, 4,900 feet. Now it's clearer on the other chart, but essentially we can descend to 4,900, but no lower than that, before we turn on to the DME Arc, and then when we're on the Arc we can descend down 3,500, and then after we've passed this 126 radial we can then drop down to 2,700. Yeah, it looks like 2,700 is the altitude we want to be at the beginning of the final approach. Okay, so next thing we need is the nav radio, second nav radio. Let's tune the second nav radio to Inverness VOR 109.2. So let's get that done. So 109.2. We can show the second course. Well, you're going to want 160 degree bearing. As you can see, deviation bar is telling us essentially we have to fly to the right or straight ahead to intercept the radar, which is good, which means we haven't intercepted the 160 radio yet because we haven't reached Bombay yet. Now the 4,900 feet is at 14 miles from Inverness. So essentially, let's say 5,000 feet at D14. D23 gives us 9, so that gives us 9 miles. So 9 miles from Bombay to our 5,000 feet point. we're at 12,000. So to drop to 5,000, that's 7,000. Yeah. So we need to drop 7,000 feet. So using the multiply by 3 rule, that's 21 miles. 7 times 3, 21 miles. We've got 21. We've got 14. 9 miles after Bombay, which means 9. You really want a bit of paper. 11 miles. I think that's right. 11 miles before Bombay, where we need to start descending. Okay, 11 miles before Bombay we need to start descending, and Bombay's at 53, so we're not far off. So let's get our next altitude select dialed in. So let's dial in 5,000 feet. So I was all set up for the other runway arrival at Inverness here, so this is going to be a bit of a test. Can we cope with this en route change of wind direction? So we got 5,000 feet pre-selected. When we get to 11 miles, which will be 53, 43, 42. In fact, now I'm going to select indicated airspeed mode, and then I'm going to throttle back. And I'm going to look for a descent rate of about 1,000 feet per minute, or just over. Should be about right. That's fine. Now the next thing we need to watch out for is that we're going to have to turn left to intercept the 160 radial to Inverness. So I'm not sure whether indicated airspeed's the best mode to use here, or whether you should use vertical speed. I quite like indicated airspeed because there's no chance of overspeeding, and you can control the rate of descent just by varying your thrust. So at 46 now, I think the thing we'll do is we'll just start to watch for this deviation indicator here to start to move in, and when that moves in we'll start a turn. Now let's get our heading bug synchronized, and then shortly we'll switch to heading mode so that we're ready to start the turn. Now vertical descent is fine, just over 1,000 feet per minute. That's grand, no problems there. Bars coming in. I'm going to switch to heading mode, and I'm going to start to turn. So what we're looking for is trying to align the deviation bar with the bearing pointer so that everything's lined up. And then we should be on the 160 bearing to Inverness. And I'm also going to switch nav1 now to the Inverness VOR. I'm going to turn to 160 degree on nav1. And I'm going to switch to nav mode, and I'm going to disable the second course for now. Okay, so now hopefully we are tracking to Inverness. We are at 8,700 feet, and we need to be at 5,000 feet by about D14. And in fact we want to start to turn at D14 to get onto the 12 DME Arc. So we're coming in at 160, then we're going to go 150, 140, 130. So we're going to rotate our bearing pointer 10 degrees at a time, and we're going to turn our heading, so turn 10 and twist 10, whichever way around it is. So next thing we want, D14 for Inverness, we're going to turn right to get onto the arc. And then we can start to descend again. So D17, so we're not far off. And we're a little bit high, so I'm just going to pull the thrust back a bit so we descend a bit more quickly. So we really want to be at 4,000 or 5,000 feet at D14. The other thing we're going to need to do is tune the other nav radio to the ILS, which is 108.5, so let's get that done while we've got a small amount of time. D14, so we want to be heading bug, heading mode, and then we want to turn about 80 degrees to the right to get onto the arc. In fact, our new altitude now can be 3,500 feet. And we'll tune the radial to 150 degree radial to Inverness. That's the next radial we want to intercept, and we want to be on the 12 DME Arc, so we're trying to stay 12 nautical miles from the Inverness VOR. We're actually coming in too close here, so I think we must have started the turn a bit late, so we'll let things drift out a bit. Still descending, which is fine. In fact, let's just drop the power back so the descent rate goes up a bit. We've crossed the 150 radial because the deviation bar is moving to the other side, so the next one we want is 140. I'm not going to do anything with our heading at the moment because we are too far in. We're at 10.5 DME distance and we want to be at 12 on the arc, so let's not touch anything else. Still descending, 3,500 feet is fine for now. And that's us crossing 140. So turn 10, that's twist 10, we're not turning. We will need to start turning soon, so otherwise we'll drift out too far. So 10.4 miles on the arc. If you have a quick look on the map, you'll see what we've done here. We've made a turn, we're now meant to be on the arc, so we're just getting back out and we're going to start to turn soon. That is 130. The next target is 120, and in fact after 126 we can then drop to 2,700 feet. So let's select 2,700 as our new target altitude, and that's in fact the final one we want before we establish. And I'm just going to bring us in slightly now because we're now at 11 DME, so we're within 1 nautical mile now where we should be. The next one we want is 110. So let's just start to turn now. Let's try and get back onto the arc. And the approach we want is 54. We want to start to turn in at 64 degrees. Okay, that's fine. So 100 now, so we're a bit away from turning yet. We're coming out now towards, we're at 11.6, so I'm going to start to turn 10 now each time. Otherwise we'll drift too far out. So we're now coming up to the 100 degree radial towards Inverness. Altitude's doing fine, speed's doing fine. Turn 10 and twist 10. 90 degree is the next one. Just to show you where we are. We are somewhere around here, and we're looking for the 64-degree radial to start to turn in for a 54-degree approach course. Okay, that's a 90-degree radial, so we can turn, and we can go for 80. We're at 2,700 feet now, which is fine. We'll keep our throttle down because we don't need to be going too fast here. We start to see the approach. I mean, the airport's somewhere over here. Inverness itself is down here. There's a Keswick Bridge. And that's 80 degrees we're coming up to. So the next one's going to be 70. So we will turn 10 and twist to 70, and then after we've crossed 70 we're nearly ready to turn in for the final approach to the ILS. What we haven't done, of course, is changed our altimeter 1027, and we need to do that right away because we are at the wrong height. In fact, we could have hit a hill by now, so that's quite bad. So 3033. In fact, yep. In fact, it's okay. I think, are we descending or? Anyway, we should have checked that after we crossed the transition altitude, so that's quite bad. Okay, we've passed. We want 64 degrees now is where we want to start our turn. Which is essentially now we want to turn into 54 degrees. So I'm going to change the VR to 54. And we essentially want to turn right in there, so the heading bug is right around here to try and get us onto the 54-degree radial. Just take the power back a notch. About 30% torque is generally good for the start of the final approach. And just to turn the localizer as well to 54, just so everything lines up when we switch to that. Okay, turn slightly late if anything. I'm going to switch to second nav source now, which is localizer, and we'll just get ourselves lined up with that. We're quite near the glide slope already, in fact, so 9 DME, so yeah, we want to get established on here as quickly as we can. Power and speed's okay. In fact, I'm going to go for approach mode now, so we intercept the glide slope. I'm going to drop the gear, and go for 1 notch of flaps. Hopefully we will start to descend. I'm not quite sure this is working, so let's go for some reason we haven't captured. I wonder if I think we're not going to capture it now. I think we're going to have to land manually here. So disengaging the autopilot. I'm going to turn my landing lights on. I am going to go auto coursen. Hang on, let's just get a better view here. So auto coursen, we can go back on. See how we're doing. So we are descending here, unfortunately without benefit of ILS. Flaps, I'm going to go for another notch. I can see the runway. It does look like we're a bit high. We need to turn prop sync off. Of course we can tell because we've got the glide slope indicator, and of course we can see that we're high. So let's just get down. We're not on a very stable approach yet, but we should be able to recover this. So we have flaps, we have landing gear, prop sync off, we have auto coursing on, props to max. Still a bit high, but we're coming onto the glide slope now. We're a bit fast. We've got one more notch of flaps to go, so let's put that in. We want to be doing about 120, and we want to be on a nice stable glide slope. Torque's a bit low, so let's get that back now. That's about right. Slightly fast. It's just... at least the wind is a headwind, which is good. Let's get ourselves lined up a bit better here. Yeah, a bit low now, if anything, so we can afford to pitch up slightly, which will bring our speed up to about 120. Not one of my best approaches. Not quite sure what happened with the autopilot and the approach mode, but something went wrong. Switching to the second nav radio. And just over the threshold, I'm going to bring the power back down to flight idle. And we are down, and we are braking. We're not going to make the first taxiway, so we shall brake, and we've got reverse thrust, which would have helped. That's it. Landing lights, taxi light on. Let's turn round, backtrack for that taxiway. Turn flaps up. Just ground idle power now. I'm not actually sure if this is a taxi way that's used, given that it is another runway, but maybe we should have gone all the way to the end and then used the taxiway that goes round the north side of the airport. I probably should have looked at the airport taxiway diagram as well. If we follow the taxiway to the left now, we should head towards the terminal building. I always wonder what that red brick building there is. So I'm not pretty sure there isn't a red brick building there like that in Inverness Airport, but I might be wrong. using live traffic, so, and I've also I've turned off the show other aircraft options, so if live traffic hasn't picked anything up, then we have a nice empty stand area, so we can pretty much pull in where we want. So let's go for this point here. Now at Inverness there's no pushback, so you don't want to stop too near the terminal building, because you need to give yourself room to be able to move and turn round. So let's shut down the engines now and engage the parking brake. Just turn head triangle. Let's have a look at the map and see how we ended up. So yeah, so a turn Bombay was pretty good. Initial turn onto the arc was a little bit late, then we sort of recovered our arc here, turned in okay, and then of course we didn't have the ILS. So what went wrong on this flight? Well, two main things, I guess. One is we didn't change the altimeter to the local pressure after the transition altitude of 3,000 feet. In fact, let's have a look at the chart. This chart may have, yeah, 3,000 feet, so we should have changed our altimeter. We did pretty much follow the arc, although of course because our pressure was wrong, obviously we could have been in danger of, well, not here because we're still above the transition level, and here is mostly sea, so well, we're probably okay, but it would have been better to do that, obviously. And the other thing that went wrong was then when we got onto the final ILS approach, for some reason, and I'm sure I've done this before, switching the navigation source to the second nav radio over here, which was already on the ILS, it didn't capture the approach mode. Now maybe I should have gone to nav mode first and then approach mode. Not entirely sure. I'll have to try that again. So the question then was, because we then found ourselves high and sort of scrambling around, having to switch off the autopilot and fly manually, should we have aborted at that point, or was it okay to continue? I mean, it wasn't too much work to recover the correct sort of glide path, but I'd be interested to know what would be the correct thing to do in that situation. Would it be to go around and try and work out what was wrong with the autopilot settings, or would it be just to land manually? And of course, you can still use the ILS for guidance when you're landing manually for the glide slope and position. So, and of course, we didn't have any problems with visibility today. I guess that's one of the main things. I mean, if you had clouds or cloud cover or mist with near minimums, then you probably couldn't fly it manually, I guess. Anyway, so an entertaining flight to Inverness for me anyway. I guess one thing to point out here is there's actually quite a lot to do for a single pilot on an approach like this, because I mean you've got to start thinking, okay, this part of the flight's fairly uneventful, but you've got to start sort of from here. You're calculating, first of all, your top of descent, basically. So we're at 12,000 feet. We know we've got to be at 5,000 feet about here, so we've got some math to do, or arithmetic to do, to add up the distances so we know when to start to descend. We've got 2 VORs to track and turn onto. We've got then the distance, so 5,000 feet distance. We've then got 2 other altitudes we have to be at. We've got to start a turn onto the arc. While we're on the arc, we've got to be monitoring the bearing to the Inverness VOR and our heading and the distance from the arc, and we've got to be getting the ILS ready. And of course, we kind of skipped some of our checklists as well. So all in all, not very good really. But just pointing out that there are there's lots to do on that approach. It's maybe a bit much for a single pilot to do. I think we got most of the things. We certainly had autocourse and prop sync, condition levers, we had flaps and landing gears, so I don't think we missed anything, but we didn't really follow the checklist properly. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.